The small town of Willow Creek sat quietly
You got business
under
here?
the fading
I'm
afternoon
looking for
sun,
someone.
its main street lined with wooden storefronts that creaked with the
got
occasional
business
gust of
here?
wind.
I'm looking
Dust
for
swirled
someone.
across the empty sidewalks, and a faint smell of hay and leather hung in the air. A young woman stepped off the worn bus that had brought her here. From the city, her satchel slung over one shoulder. Her clothes were simple, worn from months of searching for work, but her eyes carried a spark of determination that refused to fade. "I'm unemployed. Is there work here?" she asked timidly, her voice barely rising above the whispering wind. She didn't expect an answer. Small towns were not always kind to strangers, but something inside her told her she had to try. As she spoke, a shadow detached itself from the doorway of a nearby barn. A cowboy leaned against the frame, his hat tipped low over his eyes and boots. Scuffed with years of riding, pressed into the dirt, his presence was quiet but commanding, and he regarded her with a mix of curiosity and caution. "You looking for farm work or something else?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of authority that only comes from a lifetime of experience. The young woman blinked, startled by his sudden attention, and quickly shook her head. "I'll do anything," she admitted, clutching her satchel a little tighter. "I can cook, clean, work with animals, whatever you need." Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment at the desperation in her voice, but she forced herself to stand tall. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. He had seen plenty of travelers, drifters and dreamers pass through Willow Creek, most of them leaving after a day or two. But there was something different about her, something steady in the way she held herself, even with so little to offer. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, finally straightening and adjusting his hat. Not many people would ask outright in a town that doesn't know them. "Follow me." Her heart skipped. Follow him. She had no idea what to expect, but the opportunity glimmered like a candle in the dark of her uncertainty as she walked behind him across the sun-baked dirt toward the sprawling ranch beyond the edge of town. She took in her surroundings. Fields stretched for miles, dotted with grazing horses and cattle. Fences lined the property in neat rows, some newly repaired, others worn and weathered by time. The barn itself was massive, its red paint faded by years of sun and storms. "You see, work around here isn't always easy," the cowboy said, glancing at her. "It's early mornings, long days, and a lot of sweat. But if you're willing, there's always something to do." She nodded, swallowing a lump of nervousness. This was more than a job. This was a chance, maybe even a lifeline, and in that moment, as the wind carried the scent of hay and the distant sound of horses' hooves, she realized she might have stumbled into something that could change her life entirely. The next morning, the sun rose in a blaze of gold over the Willow Creek ranch. The young woman awoke before dawn, the cool air of the early morning brushing against her skin. She had been given a small room in the corner of the main farmhouse, modest but clean, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. She dressed quickly, tying her hair back and grabbing her worn boots, ready to meet the day outside. The cowboy was already tending to the horses, brushing down their coats and checking the stables. He glanced up as she approached, his eyes narrowing slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Morning," he said, his voice low but steady. "We'll start easy. Feed the horses first, then check the fences." The work was harder than she had imagined. The sun had barely risen, but the air was already thick and warm. She struggled with the heavy buckets of feed, her arms aching after just a few trips. Yet each time she looked up, the cowboy offered a nod of encouragement, silently acknowledging her effort. There was no mockery in his gaze, only a quiet respect that made her want to push herself harder. By mid-morning, she had learned to handle the horses, leading them from stall to pasture, brushing their sleek coats until they gleamed, and even soothing a skittish colt that had refused to eat. The cowboy worked alongside her, correcting her stance when she faltered, but never speaking harshly. His patience, combined with the simplicity of the ranch, began to make the young woman feel grounded, in a way she hadn't in months of city searching. During a brief break, she sat on the edge of the porch, sipping water from a tin cup. The wind carried the distant sounds of cows lowing and the rustle of leaves in the oak trees surrounding the ranch. She thought about her life before Willow Creek, the long, lonely nights, the rejection letters, the uncertainty that had followed her everywhere, and she realized that this honest hard work felt like freedom. The cowboy approached, leaning on the railing beside her. "Not bad for your first day," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. She smiled, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over her. "Thank you for giving me this chance," she replied softly. He shrugged, looking out over the fields. "It's not about giving chances. It's about proving yourself, and you've started to do that." There was a silence between them, comfortable yet charged with an unspoken understanding. She sensed that her arrival at the ranch was more than coincidence. Somehow it had been meant to happen. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, she returned to her chores with renewed determination. Every bucket of water she carried, every fence post she checked was a small victory, and as she worked, she felt the beginnings of something she hadn't dared hope for, a place where she belonged, a life she could build, and perhaps a bond with the mysterious cowboy who had quietly opened the door to a new world. By the end of the day, her muscles ached, her hands were calloused, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. The ranch, with all its dust, sweat, and simplicity, had begun to feel like home. Days turned into a rhythm on the Willow Creek Ranch, each one blending into the next. With a steady pulse of work and quiet moments of reflection, the young woman rose with the sun, learning to anticipate the needs of the horses and cattle, repairing fences that bore the scars of storms, and tending the garden that fed the farmhouse. Every task, no matter how small, carried its own reward, the pride of a job done well, and the satisfaction of contributing to something larger than herself. The cowboy watched her closely, noting the determination in her movements, the careful way she learned to read the animal's moods, and the way she carried herself, despite the aches and fatigue that inevitably followed long days. "You're getting faster," he remarked one morning, adjusting his hat against the rising sun, and calmer too. "Horses like that, they can sense if you're nervous." She smiled, brushing her hands against her apron. "I think I'm starting to understand them," she admitted, feeling a surge of confidence. She had once thought of work as a chore, a means to an end. Here, it was something else entirely. It was connection, responsibility, and even a kind of silent joy. The evenings became their own kind of sanctuary. After the day's labor, they would sit on the porch, watching the sun sink behind rolling hills that seemed to stretch forever. Sometimes they spoke, sharing stories of past hardships, fleeting moments of triumph, or small observations about the ranch and its routines. Other times they simply sat in silence, letting the sounds of nature, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of the wind through the oaks, fill the spaces between them. One afternoon, a particularly stubborn horse refused to follow her instructions. She tried everything she had learned, but the animal wouldn't budge. Frustration pricked at the edges of her patience. The cowboy appeared beside her, quietly placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "it's not about forcing them. It's about trust they'll follow someone they believe in, not someone who's angry." She took a deep breath and tried again, this time softer, calmer, speaking gently as she guided the horse into line. To her relief and quiet pride, the horse finally obeyed. She looked at the cowboy, who nodded with approval, and she felt a warmth in her chest she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just pride in her accomplishment. It was the quiet satisfaction of earning respect through patience and effort. As the days went on, she began to notice other subtle shifts. The way the cowboy's gaze softened when he thought she wasn't looking. The faint but unmistakable effort he made to include her in decisions about the ranch. And the little conversations that lingered longer than necessary. She realized that their bond was growing, not just as employer and worker, but as companions, navigating the simplicity and complexity of this ranch life together. By the end of the week, her hands bore the marks of hard labor. Her shoulders ached, but she felt stronger and more capable than she had in years. Willow Creek wasn't just a place she had landed in out of necessity. It was becoming home, and the cowboy, once a stranger leaning in the barn doorway, was slowly becoming someone she couldn't imagine the ranch without. Weeks passed on the Willow Creek Ranch, and the young woman had become an inseparable part of its rhythm. She moved with confidence, knowing the routines of the animals, the land, and the work that sustained them. The cowboy watched her not just as an employee, but as someone he could rely on, a steady presence. In a life that often demanded resilience and solitude, one evening the sky burned in shades of amber and rose, the sun casting long shadows across the fields. They sat on the porch together, the air warm with the lingering heat of the day. For a moment neither spoke, only listening to the distant lowing of cattle and the whispering wind through the trees. Finally, the cowboy broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "You've done well here," he said, turning his gaze to her. "Not just with the work you've earned your place on this ranch." Her heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but they carried weight she hadn't expected. She had come to Willow Creek desperate for employment, unsure if she would ever find stability, let alone respect. Now she felt both. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft, almost reverent. "I didn't know I could feel at home somewhere like this." He looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. Home isn't just a place, he said. It's the people you choose to be with, the work you care about, and the life you build for yourself. You found that here, and maybe you've reminded me what that feels like too. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky deepened to indigo. Stars began to pierce the darkness, and the ranch seemed to exhale with the calm of evening. They sat in silence again, shoulders brushing lightly, each lost in thoughts that didn't need to be spoken. Over the following days, their connection deepened. She found herself laughing more freely, sharing stories she had never thought to tell, and feeling the quiet comfort of someone who understood. The hardships and triumphs of the land. The cowboy in turn revealed glimpses of his own past, why he stayed in Willow Creek, the losses he had endured, and the pride he felt in maintaining the ranch he had inherited. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but one evening as they watched the moon rise over the rolling hills, she realized that the question she had asked weeks ago, humble, desperate, uncertain, had led her here. She wasn't just employed anymore. She belonged, she had found purpose, respect, and in the quiet moments, a warmth that hinted at something more profound. The cowboy turned to her, his expression softening. "You've changed things here," he said quietly, "for me, for the ranch, maybe even for yourself." She smiled, feeling the truth in his words. The small town's dusty streets, the hard labor, and the unexpected kindness had transformed her life. What had begun as a humble question asked in uncertainty had grown into something lasting, real and irreplaceable. As night fell, they sat side by side, watching over the ranch, listening to the rhythm of the land and the quiet peace they had both discovered. The young woman understood now that life often led you to the places you needed most, even if you never expected it. And in Willow Creek, amid sweat, sunsets, and honest work, she had found not only a home, but the beginning of a life she could finally call her own.